The bank's fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of judgmental wasps, their cold glare pinning Patrick to the counter as the teller's eyes narrowed. He was just a guy in a worn-out hoodie, trying to withdraw $500, money he'd scraped together over months of freelance gigs. But to them, he was a problem, a glitch in their pristine system, and the word suspicious hung in the air like a guillotine. Patrick's fingers trembled as he slid his ID across the counter. At 28, he'd faced enough sidelong glances to know what they saw: a lanky guy with messy chestnut hair, green eyes that flickered with defiance, and a vibe that screamed outsider. The teller, a middle-aged woman with a tight bun and tighter lips, tapped her keyboard with deliberate slowness, her gaze darting between his ID and her screen. "This account is flagged," she said, her voice clipped. "We'll need to verify your identity further." Where did this money come from? The question hit like a slap. Patrick's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "It's mine. I earned it." Freelance graphic design. He wasn't lying. Every cent was his. Clawed from late nights, hunched over his laptop, designing logos for startups that paid late, if at all. But the teller's raised eyebrow told him she didn't believe a word. To her, he was a nobody, probably some scammer trying to pull a fast one at First National Bank in downtown Brooklyn. Behind him, the line of customers shifted restlessly. A man in a suit muttered something about wasting time. A woman with a stroller sighed loudly. Patrick felt their stares boring into his back, each one a tiny accusation. He wanted to scream that he wasn't a criminal, that he just needed the money for rent, for groceries, for a life that kept slipping through his fingers. But screaming wouldn't help. It never did. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside," the teller said, her tone final. "We'll have to escalate this to the manager." Patrick's heart sank. Escalate. That word always meant trouble. He stepped to the side, clutching his ID, his mind racing. He'd been through this before. Banks, landlords, even coffee shop baristas who looked at him like he didn't belong. Being openly gay in a world that still bristled at his existence didn't help. Neither did the fact that he and his husband, Julian, lived a life that didn't fit neatly into anyone's boxes. Julian. The thought of him steadied Patrick's racing pulse. Julian, with his warm brown eyes, sharp jawline, and quiet strength, was the one person who made the world's judgment feel bearable. They met 3 years ago at a queer art gallery opening in Manhattan, where Patrick's bold, colorful designs had caught Julian's eye. What started as a shy conversation over cheap wine had blossomed into a love that felt like a revolution, fierce, unapologetic, and theirs. But Julian wasn't here now, and Patrick was alone, facing a room full of strangers who'd already decided he was guilty of something. The bank manager, a balding man in a cheap suit, approached with a frown. "Mr. Callahan, we've got a problem," he said, glancing at his tablet. "Your account shows irregular activity. Large deposits. Then this withdrawal request, it's raising red flags." Patrick's stomach twisted. Large deposits? He hadn't deposited anything big, just his usual freelance payments. Maybe a few $100 at a time. "Can you explain the source of these funds?" the manager pressed. Patrick opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain a life that didn't make sense to people like this? A life where he and Julian scraped by, not because they were reckless, but because the world wasn't built for people like them. He was about to try when the glass doors of the bank swung open with a whoosh, and every head in the room turned. Julian stood there, his tailored charcoal suit catching the light, his presence commanding the space like he'd been born to it. At 30, he was a vision of confidence, jet black hair swept back, brown eyes blazing with purpose. The room seemed to shrink around him, the hum of the bank fading into a stunned silence. Patrick's heart leapt, relief flooding through him like sunlight breaking through clouds. Julian wasn't just his husband. He was his anchor, his defiance, his home. "Patrick," Julian said, his voice calm but edged with steel as he crossed the room. "What's going on?" The manager blinked, clearly thrown by Julian's arrival. The teller's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish caught out of water. Patrick exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. "They think I'm trying to scam them. Over $500. Julian's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something fiercer, protectiveness. He turned to the manager, his tone polite but unyielding. "I'm Julian Navarro, Patrick's husband. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Can we resolve this now?" The manager hesitated, his gaze flickering between Patrick and Julian. "Mr. Navarro, this is about account security. We have protocols." "Understand protocols," Julian cut in, his voice smooth but firm. "But my husband is not a criminal. If there's an issue with his account, I like to see the details." Immediately, the word husband landed like a thunderclap. The teller's eyes widened, and a few customers exchanged glances. Patrick felt a familiar mix of pride and unease. He and Julian had never hidden their relationship, but in moments like this, it felt like they were daring the world to react. And the world always did. The manager cleared his throat, clearly rattled. Let's take this to my office." He gestured toward a glass-walled room at the back of the bank. Patrick followed, Julian's hand brushing against his in a quiet gesture of solidarity. As they walked, Patrick caught snippets of whispers from the crowd. "Who is that guy? Husband. Looks like trouble." He ignored them, focusing on Julian's steady presence beside him. In the office, the manager pulled up Patrick's account on his computer, his fingers fumbling over the keys. "There's a deposit here," he said, squinting at the screen. $10,000. Made last week. It's unusual for this account." Patrick frowned. "10,000? I didn't deposit that. There must be a mistake." He glanced at Julian, expecting confusion. But Julian's expression was unreadable, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The manager kept scrolling, his brow furrowing. "There's another one. 20,000. 2 days ago. And hold on." He paused, his eyes widening. "This can't be right. There's a transfer pending for $1 million. Patrick's jaw dropped. $1 million? That's not my account. I'm telling you, I just wanted my $500. His voice cracked, panic rising. Julian placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "Patrick, it's okay," he said softly. "I can explain." The manager looked up, his face pale. "Mr. Navarro, are you saying you know something about this?" Julian's smile widened, but there was a glint in his eyes that Patrick didn't recognize, something almost mischievous. "I do," Julian said. "But first, let's clear up this nonsense about my husband being suspicious. Then we can talk about the money." Patrick's head spun. "Money? What money?" He stared at Julian, searching for answers. But Julian only squeezed his hand, his gaze steady and warm. "Trust me," he whispered. And despite the chaos, despite the stares and the accusations, Patrick did. He always would. The manager's office felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension and unanswered questions. Patrick sat rigid in the stiff leather chair, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. $1 million? Deposits he didn't make? Julian's cryptic smile only deepened the mystery, and Patrick couldn't shake the feeling that something massive was about to unravel. Julian leaned back in his chair, exuding a calm that contrasted sharply with the manager's nervous fidgeting. "Let's start with the basics," Julian said, his voice smooth as polished steel. "Patrick's account is linked to mine. Those deposits you're seeing, they're for me." He paused, letting the words sink in. The manager's eyes widened, his fingers freezing on the keyboard. Patrick's breath caught. "Linked accounts? Since when?" "Mr. Navarro," the manager stammered. "You're saying you authorized these transfers? But the amounts are substantial. We need documentation. Proof of." "I'll provide everything you need," Julian interrupted, his tone polite but edged with authority. "But first, I want an apology for the way my husband was treated. He came here to access his own money, and you've made him feel like a criminal." Patrick's chest tightened. Julian's words were a shield, protecting him from the judgment that had followed him his whole life. Growing up in a small Ohio town, Patrick had learned early that being himself, openly gay, unapologetically artistic, came with a cost. He'd been called names, sidelined, dismissed. Even in New York, where he'd hoped to find freedom, the world still found ways to make him feel small. But Julian made him feel seen, valued, invincible. The manager cleared his throat, his face flushing. "We were just following protocol, Mr. Navarro." No offense was intended. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But Julian didn't press. Instead, he pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and slid it across the desk. "Check your system now," he said. "You'll see the authorization for the transfers." The manager hesitated, then typed furiously. His screen flickered, and his jaw slackened. This is from Navarro Enterprises," he said, almost to himself. "You're Julian Navarro, CEO of Navarro Enterprises." His voice trembled, as if he'd just realized he was in the presence of royalty. Patrick's head snapped toward Julian. "CEO? Navarro Enterprises?" He knew Julian worked in tech. Something vague about consulting and investments. They met when Julian was just another guy in an art gallery. Charming and unpretentious, with a laugh that made Patrick's heart skip. Sure, Julian had money. His tailored suits and occasional extravagant dates hinted at it. But a CEO? A billionaire? Patrick's stomach churned. Why hadn't Julian told him? Julian's eyes met Patrick's, soft and reassuring. "We'll talk later," he murmured, just for him. Then, to the manager, "Yes, that's me. Now, can my husband withdraw his $500 without further hassle?" The manager nodded vigorously, his earlier suspicion replaced by a cloying eagerness to please. "Of course, Mr. Navarro. Mr. Callahan. I'll process it immediately." He practically leapt from his chair, scurrying to the teller counter to bark orders. Patrick barely heard him. His mind was stuck on Julian, his husband, his partner, apparently a billionaire CEO who'd been depositing millions into his account without a word. As the manager bustled away, Patrick leaned closer to Julian, his voice low. "You've got some explaining to do," he said, half teasing, half serious. Julian's lips quirked into a smile, but there was a flicker of nervousness in his eyes, something Patrick had never seen before. "I know," Julian said, squeezing Patrick's hand. "Tonight. I promise." His tone was earnest, but it did little to quiet the storm of questions in Patrick's mind. They'd built their life together on honesty, or so he'd thought. What else was Julian hiding? The manager returned, handing Patrick a crisp envelope with $500 in cash. "All set, Mr. Callahan," he said, his smile forced. "And, my apologies for the confusion." Patrick nodded, too dazed to respond. He tucked the envelope into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the worn fabric of his hoodie. The money felt like a lifeline, but it was nothing compared to the weight of Julian's secret. As they left the bank, Julian's arm slipped around Patrick's waist, a familiar gesture that usually felt like home. But now, it carried a question mark. They stepped into the crisp Brooklyn air, the city buzzing around them, taxis honking, pedestrians rushing, the skyline glittering in the distance. Patrick glanced at Julian, whose expression was unreadable, a mix of love and something deeper, something guarded. "Navarro Enterprises," Patrick said, testing the words. "You're kind of big deal." "Huh?" Julian chuckled, but it was strained. "I didn't want it to define us," he said. "I wanted to be just Julian." "You're Julian." He stopped walking, turning to face Patrick. His brown eyes were earnest, almost pleading. "I was going to tell you." "I swear." Patrick wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at his edges. He'd spent his life fighting to be seen for who he was, not what others assumed. Had Julian been hiding this to protect him, or because he didn't trust him? "Tonight," Patrick said firmly. "No more secrets." Julian nodded, his jaw tight. No more secrets. But as they walked toward their apartment, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot, Patrick couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was just the beginning. Their Brooklyn apartment was a sanctuary, a cozy fifth-floor walk-up filled with mismatched furniture, art supplies, and the faint scent of Julian's cedarwood cologne. But tonight, as Patrick dropped his keys on the counter, the space felt smaller, the air charged with unspoken words. Julian's secret hung between them like a storm cloud, heavy and ready to burst. Patrick kicked off his sneakers and sank onto the couch, his mind replaying the bank scene. Julian, the billionaire CEO. The idea was absurd, like something out of a movie, yet explained so much: the expensive dinners, the way Julian never flinched at bills, the quiet confidence that drew people to him like moths to a flame, but also opened a chasm of doubt. What else didn't Patrick know about the man he'd married? Julian stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the twinkling city lights. He'd shed his suit jacket, his white dress shirt rolled up to his elbows, revealing the lean muscles of his forearms. "I owe you an explanation," he said, his voice soft but steady. "And I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Patrick crossed his arms, his green eyes searching Julian's face. "Start talking," he said, his tone sharper than he intended. He wasn't angry. Not exactly, just raw, exposed, like a nerve laid bare. He'd trusted Julian with everything, his heart, his fears, his dreams. The idea that Julian had held back something so monumental stung deeper than he wanted to admit. Julian sat beside him, close but not touching, as if giving Patrick space to breathe. Navarro Enterprises started as a tech startup I built in college. He began. It was just me and a couple of friends, coding in a dorm room, trying to create AI that could predict market trends. We got lucky, really lucky. A venture capitalist saw our demo, and within a year, we were valued at $1 billion. He paused, running a hand through his jet black hair. I never meant for it to become my whole life. But it did. Patrick listened, his heart pounding. $1 billion. The number was incomprehensible. A universe away from his own world of scraping by, of choosing between groceries and art supplies. And you didn't think to mention this? He asked, his voice tight. We've been married for 2 years. Julian. 2 years. Julian's eyes softened, filled with a mix of guilt and tenderness. I wanted to. But every time I tried, I didn't want to change us. You loved me when I was just Julian, the guy who spilled wine on your sketchbook at that gallery. I was afraid if you knew, you'd see me differently. Like I was some untouchable CEO, not your partner. Patrick's throat tightened. He remembered that night, the way Julian's laugh had cut through the gallery's pretentious hum, the way his brown eyes had sparkled with genuine interest in Patrick's art. They talked for hours, oblivious to the crowd, and by the end of the night, Patrick had known he was falling. You think I'd love you less because you're rich? He said, his voice breaking. That's not fair. Julian. I'm not that shallow. I know you're not, Julian said quickly, reaching for Patrick's hand. His touch was warm, grounding. It wasn't about you. It was about me. Growing up, money was a weapon. My father used it to control everyone around him, including me. When I built Navarro Enterprises, I swore I'd never let it define me. Or us. Patrick's anger softened, replaced by a pang of empathy. Julian rarely spoke about his family, but when he did, it was in fragments, stories of a cold, demanding father, a mother who'd left when he was young. Patrick had always sensed the weight of those wounds, even if Julian hid them behind his polished exterior. So why the deposits? Patrick asked. 10,000, 20,000, $1 million? What's that about? Julian hesitated, his gaze dropping to their joined hands. I wanted to surprise you, he said quietly. You've been working so hard. Patrick, killing yourself on those freelance gigs, barely sleeping. I see how much it takes out of you. I thought if I could ease that burden, give you the freedom to focus on your art, it'd be worth it. Patrick's heart stuttered. His art. It was his lifeline, his way of making sense of the world, but it rarely paid the bills. He'd spent years juggling commissions, sacrificing sleep and sanity to keep their apartment, to prove he could stand on his own. The idea that Julian had seen his struggle and wanted to help, it was overwhelming, but it also felt like a betrayal. You should have asked me, he said. I don't want to be kept. I want to be your equal. You are my equal, Julian said fiercely, his grip tightening. You're everything to me. The money doesn't change that. I wanted to give you the world. Patrick. Because you deserve it. The sincerity in Julian's voice cracked something open in Patrick. He wanted to be angry, to hold onto the hurt, But Julian's love was a tidal wave, washing away his defenses. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against Julian's, their breaths mingling. "No more secrets," he whispered. "Promise me." "I promise," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. They sat there, foreheads touching, the city humming outside. For a moment, it was just them, Patrick and Julian, two men who'd found each other in a world that often tried to tear them apart. But the moment didn't last. A sharp knock at the door jolted them upright. Patrick frowned, glancing at Julian. "You expecting someone?" Julian shook his head, his expression wary. Patrick stood, crossing to the door, his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't name. Standing in the hallway was a man in a sleek black suit, his face all sharp angles and cold eyes. "Patrick Callahan?" he asked, his voice clipped. "I'm with Navarro Enterprises. We need to talk about your husband's company and the threats against it." Patrick's blood ran cold. "Threats?" He glanced back at Julian, whose face had gone pale, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked dangerously like fear. The man in the black suit introduced himself as Marcus Reed, head of security for Navarro Enterprises. His presence in their cramped apartment felt like an invasion, his polished shoes and steely demeanor clashing with the colorful chaos of Patrick's art supplies. Patrick stood frozen by the door, his mind racing. Threats against Julian's company? This was a world he didn't know, a world Julian had kept hidden. Julian rose from the couch, his expression a mask of control, but Patrick caught the slight tremor in his hands. "Marcus," Julian said, his voice steady but low. "What's this about?" He gestured for the man to sit, but Marcus remained standing, his posture rigid. "We've intercepted communications," Marcus said, pulling a tablet from his briefcase. "Emails. Encrypted messages. Someone's targeting Navarro Enterprises, specifically you. They know about your marriage, Julian, and they're using it." He glanced at Patrick, his eyes assessing, not unkind, but not warm either. "They're digging into Mr. Callahan's background, looking for leverage." Patrick's stomach dropped. Leverage? His life was an open book, freelance gigs, a modest upbringing, a few parking tickets. What could anyone possibly want with him? "Who's they?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "And why me?" Marcus tapped his tablet, pulling up a grainy screenshot of an email. "We don't know yet. Could be competitors. Could be personal. Navarro Enterprises has made enemies, big players who don't like Julian's push for ethical AI or his refusal to play dirty in the market." He handed the tablet to Julian, who scanned it, his jaw tightening. "This email mentions you, Patrick. Your past, your family, even your art. They're trying to paint you as unstable. A liability." Patrick's face burned. Unstable. The word cut deep, dragging up memories of his teenage years, his father's disapproval when he came out, the whispers at school, the constant fight to prove he was enough. "That's bullshit," he snapped, his hands clenching into fists. "I'm not some pawn in their game." Julian's hand found his, a quiet anchor. "You're not," he said firmly, his eyes locked on Patrick's. "This is about me, not you. They're trying to get to me through you." He turned to Marcus, his voice cold. "What do they want? Money? Influence? Maybe just chaos?" Marcus said. "They've hinted at leaking false stories to the press about you. your marriage, the company. They're demanding a meeting. Tomorrow, in Manhattan. They want you there. Julian. Alone. No way, Patrick said before Julian could respond. You're not going alone. If they're dragging me into this, I'm not sitting on the sidelines. His heart pounded, fear and anger twisting together. He wasn't a fighter, not in the physical sense, but he'd spent his life battling for his place in the world. He wasn't about to let some faceless enemy tear down what he and Julian had built. Julian's eyes softened, but there was steel beneath. Patrick, this could be dangerous. I don't want you caught in the crossfire, and I don't want you facing this alone, Patrick shot back. We're in this together. Always have been. The words were a vow, a reminder of the promises they'd made under a starry sky at their small, joyful wedding in the Catskills. Julian had been his rock then, and Patrick would be his now. Marcus cleared his throat, breaking the moment. I'd advise against it, but if you're both coming, we need a plan. Security will be tight, but these people are unpredictable. Julian, you know the stakes. If they expose your personal life, it could tank the company's stock. Patrick's mind reeled. The company. The money. The threats. This wasn't just about him and Julian anymore. It was a war. One fought in boardrooms and shadows, with their love as collateral damage. He squeezed Julian's hand, grounding himself. What do we do? He asked Marcus. We go to the meeting, Marcus said. We listen. We assess. But you both need to be prepared. These people don't play nice. He packed up his tablet, his expression grim. I'll send you the details. Be ready by 8 a.m. After Marcus left, the apartment fell silent, the weight of his words lingering. Patrick turned to Julian, searching his face. Why didn't you tell me it was this serious? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The company, the enemies, I could have handled it. Julian pulled him close, his arms a fortress against the world. I didn't want you to carry this, he murmured into Patrick's hair. You've already fought so much. I thought I could keep this part of my life separate, protect you from it. Patrick pulled back, meeting Julian's eyes. You don't get to decide what I can handle, he said, his voice firm but laced with love. We're a team, Julian. Whatever's coming, we face it together. Julian nodded, his eyes shining with something that looked like pride. Together, he agreed. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the city's heartbeat pulsing outside. But as Patrick leaned into Julian's warmth, a flicker of fear lingered. Tomorrow, they'd step into a world of power and danger, a world where their love might be their greatest strength, or their greatest vulnerability. The Manhattan skyscraper loomed like a monolith, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun in blinding shards. Patrick gripped Julian's hand as they stepped out of the black SUV, Marcus and 2 security guards flanking them. The meeting was set for the 40th floor, in a conference room that felt a world away from their Brooklyn apartment. Patrick's stomach churned, but he squared his shoulders, determined to face whatever awaited them. Inside, the elevator ride was silent, the air thick with tension. Julian looked impeccable in a navy suit, but his jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the mirrored walls as if expecting an ambush. Patrick, in a borrowed blazer and jeans, fell out of place, like an imposter in this world of power and wealth. But Julian's hand in his was a reminder they were in this together. The conference room was stark, all glass and steel, with a long table dominated by a single figure. The woman stood as they entered, her sleek blonde bob and tailored red dress exuding authority. "Julia Navarro," she said, her voice smooth but cold. "And Patrick Callahan, I presume." Her eyes flicked to Patrick, appraising him like a chess piece. "Elena Voss," Julian said, his tone neutral but guarded. "You're behind this?" Patrick recognized the name from news articles, a rival tech mogul, known for her ruthless tactics and empire of data analytics firms. She was a predator in a boardroom, and now she was targeting them. "Sit," Elena said, gesturing to the chairs across from her. Marcus and the guards stay by the door, their presence a silent warning. Patrick sat beside Julian, his heart racing. Elena's smile was sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. "Let's be clear," she said. "Navarro Enterprises is a threat to my business. Your AI, your ethics, it's bad for profits. I want you out of the game, Julian. And I'm willing to pay for it." Julian's expression didn't waver. "I'm not selling my company," he said. "And I'm not intimidated by your threats." Elena's laugh was low, almost amused. "Oh, this isn't about intimidation. It's about leverage." She slid a tablet across the table, displaying a dossier filled with photos, Patrick at art galleries, Julian at charity events, even candid shots of them together, laughing in Central Park. "The press would love this story," she said. "The billionaire CEO and his struggling artist husband. A scandal waiting to happen." Patrick's blood boiled. "You're threatening to out us?" he snapped. "We're already out. The world knows we're married." His voice shook, but he didn't care. This wasn't just about Julian's company. It was about their life, their love, being weaponized. Elena's smile didn't falter. "It's not about your marriage. It's about perception. A few well-placed stories, your financial struggles, Patrick's unstable past, maybe some creative embellishments about fraud or infidelity, and Navarro Enterprises stock plummets. Investors don't like mess. Julian. You know that." Julian's hand tightened around Patrick's under the table. "You're playing a dangerous game." "Elena," he said, his voice low. "You don't know what I'm capable of. And you don't know what I have," she countered. "Resign as CEO. Sell me your AI patents. Or I bury you both." She leaned back, her eyes glittering with confidence. "You have 48 hours. The room fell silent, the weight of her ultimatum crushing. Patrick's mind raced. This wasn't just about money or power. It was personal. Elena was attacking their life, their bond, because it was a vulnerability she could exploit. He glanced at Julian, whose face was a mask of control. But Patrick knew him too well. Beneath the calm, Julian was scared, not for himself, but for them. As they left the skyscraper, the city's noise felt distant, muffled by the storm in Patrick's head. Marcus drove them back to Brooklyn, briefing Julian on security measures. But Patrick barely listened. He was thinking about Elena's words, the photos, the threat to their future. "We can't let her win," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the car's hum. Julian turned to him, his eyes searching. "She won't," he said, but there was a crack in his confidence, a vulnerability Patrick hadn't seen before. I can't lose you. Patrick." "Not to this. You won't," Patrick said fiercely. He leaned across the seat, kissing Julian hard, a promise sealed in defiance. We're stronger than her. Than all of them. Julian kissed him back, desperate and hungry. And for a moment, the world faded away. But as they pulled up to their apartment, Patrick's resolve hardened. They needed a plan, not just to save Julian's company, but to protect what mattered most, their love, their life, their right to exist unapologetically. And Patrick was ready to fight for it. Back in their apartment, the night stretched long and restless. Patrick and Julian sat at their small kitchen table, a laptop open between them, its screen glowing with articles, emails, and Marcus's security reports. Elena Voss's threat loomed like a guillotine, but Patrick refused to let it fall. "We need to fight back," he said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion tugging at him. "Not just defend, attack." Julian nodded, his eyes bloodshot but determined. "She's banking on us being reactive, staying quiet to avoid a scandal. But I know her weaknesses. Her company's built on shaky ethics, data breaches, employee lawsuits. If we can expose that, we turn the tables." Patrick leaned forward, his artist's mind spinning. "A story," he said. "Not hers, but ours. We control the narrative. Show the world who we are, two guys in love, building a life, not some scandal waiting to be exploited." His fingers itched for a sketchbook. But this wasn't about art. It was about survival. "Your company's about ethical AI, right? Let's use that. Prove you're the good guy." Julian's smile was small but genuine. The first real one Patrick had seen all day. "You're brilliant," he said, pulling Patrick into a quick, fierce kiss. "Let's do it. A press conference. Tomorrow. We go public about us. About the threats. About everything." The next 24 hours were a blur of preparation. Julian worked with his PR team, crafting a statement that was both a defense and a declaration. Patrick, meanwhile, poured his heart into a series of social media posts, photos of them together, candid and raw, paired with words about love, resilience, and the fight for a better world. He wasn't just an artist now. He was a warrior, wielding their story like a shield. The press conference was held in a sleek Manhattan hotel, the room packed with reporters, cameras flashing like a storm. Julian stood at the podium, Patrick by his side, their hands clasped tightly. Julian's voice was steady as he spoke. "Navarro Enterprises is under attack," he said, "not because of our technology, but because of who I am. Who we are." He gestured to Patrick, his eyes shining with pride. "My husband, Patrick Callahan, is the heart of everything I do. And we won't let anyone use our love as a weapon." Patrick's chest swelled as he took the mic. "I'm not a billionaire," he said, his voice clear despite the nerves. "I'm an artist, a husband, a guy who's fought to be himself every day. We're not hiding. We're not ashamed. And we're not backing down." The room erupted in applause, cameras clicking furiously. For the first time, Patrick felt the world's eyes on him not as judgment, but as support. Behind the scenes, Marcus's team leaked evidence of Elena's shady practices, documents proving her company's data violations, testimonies from whistleblowers. By evening, the news cycle had shifted. Headlines screamed about Voss Analytics scandals, not Navarro Enterprises. Elena's ultimatum crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. her empire teetering as investors pulled out. That night, back in their apartment, Patrick and Julian collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but triumphant. The city sparkled outside, a testament to their resilience. "We did it," Patrick murmured, his head resting on Julian's chest. "We're still standing." Julian kissed his forehead, his voice thick with emotion. "Because of you," he said. "You reminded me what we're fighting for. Not the company, not the money us." Patrick looked up, his green eyes meeting Julian's brown ones. "Always us," he said. They kissed, slow and deep, a promise forged in fire. The world would always have its battles, its judgments, its threats. But together, they were unstoppable, a love that defied every obstacle, a story that rewrote the rules. As the city hummed below, Patrick thought of the bank, the $500, the suspicion that had sparked this journey. It wasn't about the money. It was about them, two men who'd found each other, who'd fought for each other, and who'd proven that love, in all its messy, beautiful glory, was worth everything.